I what you're saying resonates with what I've been thinking.
Okay, we won't wait. Lorin, please say something to introduce yourself for the recording purposes.
Lorin Friesen.
The floor is yours. We're listening.
Okay. Yeah, Lorin Friesen here. I've been working on theory of called mental symmetry for a few decades, and I'm going to explain. We're going to look at it mainly from a neurological perspective, and yeah, my background is engineering and music, so that's my bias. Let's start here. Okay. Okay. I've got the thing. I need to start the slideshow from the beginning. And good. Now I need to share.
Should be a green button.
Yep. And there we go. Okay. Theory is called mental symmetry because of all the symmetries that popped out when I was working on this theory. Initially started working on it with my older brother. And what it is it models the brain as 7 high-level interacting cognitive modules. So it's not at a neuron level, it is at a much higher level. I have been thinking about the neuron level stuff, but that's not explicitly part of the model. And it also looks at neuromodulators. There's no math in the model, but one of the topics I looked at is how can these modules interact in order to generate math? So it was that way. It's a model of the mind, not the brain, because it was initially developed by looking at cognitive styles, personality types, and so looking at how people think, and then it was mapped onto neurology. So I use neurology as a backup, as a way of making sure that I'm on the right track. And neurology adds a lot of details, and it provides evidence. I've got 3 papers uploaded that look at the neurology, and all of the papers, about 2/3 of the references are from 2015 and newer. So it's based on current neurology. And there. It's a meta theory. A theory says this is how things work, everybody else is wrong. A meta theory says here's an overall framework, other theories fit here, there, 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 there. So that's what I've been using it as a framework within which to place other theories. Ecological validity, in other words, it doesn't come out of the lab, it comes out of observation of people, studying people. The initial data came from analyzing 200 biographies. So, and I've been using it, trying to test it and extend it by applying it to many areas, such as social interaction, linguistics, economic history, science, religion, and others. But those are the ones that I've tried to do it at a fairly rigorous level. Also has been used for decades at a counseling level, simply as a system of cognitive styles, and is used this system as a system of cognitive styles with these labels. It is used by others at a counseling level, but I don't know of anyone else who has taken it to this theoretical level. And it's a new paradigm. In other words, I'm not trying to say that everybody else is wrong. I'm trying to take the facts that other people have discovered and fit them together in a different way. So rearranging existing stuff. Okay, I got 21 slides. And what we're going to do is look at different facets of the model and then relate that to neurology. Okay, there's the diagram. I sent it around just so that there's a little bit of sleep on something, because once you've slept on something, you remember it a little bit. Did you all have a chance to look at that? Just at least glance at it? Okay. So there are 3 axes. The first is 2 ways of processing. what I call analytic and associative. Analytic, there's the time, the sequencing, the order. Associative space, those are the connections. One thing relates to another. And analytic, generally, roughly speaking, relates to left hemisphere. Associative, roughly speaking, to right hemisphere. Two ways of labeling information. There is emotion. Good luck defining it. We all know what it is. I remember reading that in a neurology paper. It says, well, what is neurology? What is emotion? Well, we all know what it is, but nobody knows how to define it. Okay. And confidence. Confidence is a label of certainty that is attached to information. And two mental circuits. If the one diagonal is abstract, the other is concrete. The blue is abstract, the green is concrete, and then two kinds of modules. So the ones on the left and the right are, I call simple modules, and then the ones in the middle are composite. Okay, for example, if we look at the server module, the server person with a cognitive style of server, they are concrete. You can see my my cursor moving around?
No.
Oh, okay. My cursor is not visible?
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
Good. I just wanted to make sure on that. Okay, so for example, the server combines concrete thought, so concrete rather than abstract, analytical, dealing with sequences, and applies a label of confidence. So you have concrete sequences, that's sequences of movement. That's one of the major examples of concrete sequences. And a label of confidence means how certain am I of the action. For example, I may know how to walk on a log, but lose the confidence, have insufficient confidence to walk on the log when I'm on top of a chasm. Look at one more. Okay. Mercy is emotion, concrete, and associative. So the mercy thought adds emotional labels to experiences, and then one experience brings to mind associatively other related experiences. So the mercy person goes into a situation, they are reminded of related emotional experiences. Now, how does this relate to concrete thought? Well, there's your goal. Hey, I want some coffee. There's an emotional experience. So then I have to do some action in order to get the coffee. Okay. So that's the way that you can derive a lot of the traits from the axes and just applying them to the modules. Okay.
Where are goals in this typology?
Goals. Okay, we'll get to that. Goals are either the mercy, which is the concrete goal. That's like, hey, I want coffee, it tastes good. Or there's a goal of understanding. Okay. And we will be spending most of our time looking at these various pieces, especially goals. That's one of the major things we will be looking at.
Okay.
Yes, and then the middle ones, they're combinations. So exhorter combines teacher and mercy, contributor combines server and perceiver. Okay. Now, rough mapping onto the brain. This is the mapping that I found out in the 1980s, and just the rough mapping. So you have left hemisphere, server and teacher. There's the superior root of where, the inferior path of what. We're just starting really vague here. So mercy person, remember, emotional experience and associative. So remembers emotional experiences, forms personal identity. So you're looking at orbital, frontal, and temporal in the right hemisphere, and we'll look at that. All right. Teacher, there's your standard Broca's area, Wernicke's area. Teacher thought is abstract, sequence, emotional. Okay, abstract sequences, that's speech, because speech is an abstract sequence and builds theories. The teacher person wants to know how things fit together. They want order within complexity. Now, okay, I want to spend a little bit of time on this. Mercy emotion, attaching emotional labels to experiences, everybody knows what that is intuitively, because even a baby does that. Theories generate emotion. The idea that facts are not emotional, but when they come together, that structure generates an emotion of order within complexity. It's the light bulb that goes on to people's head. It's the sort of thing that drives mathematics, where, oh, wow, a new theory, isn't that cool? It's the feeling of beauty, order, structure. It emerges in a lot of forms. Now, it's not generally talked about, this theoretical emotion now. It used to be in Greek and Renaissance times, but not now. Interesting. I put together a little paper that talks about this, the idea that when things fit together, it creates an emotion, a theoretical emotion. I got extensive pushback from several individuals who said, you're not scientific. No. Science has nothing to do with emotion. Science is not emotional. No, theories don't generate emotions. They were extremely emotional in their insistence that theories don't generate emotion. It was very interesting. And then I looked at these people's profiles, and in each case, each had a general theory of personality or whatever that they were trying to promote. So their theory was generating emotions in their head. Very interesting. Okay. I just want to give a flavor on that because um, there's something weird there with theoretical emotion and trying to be objective. Okay, perceiver, right hemisphere connections, abstract, associative, confidence. So one fact reminds of another, and then a label of certainty is placed upon each fact. And that's the type of person I am. That's the way I think. Works with facts, objects, maps, server, deals with actions. We already looked at that one. So there's the ventral what path, the dorsal where path, and each module is fractal. For example, the perceiver module that deals with facts will deal with little facts like specific facts, all the way up to universal truths. In each case, it's a connection, a repeated connection that is solid. Okay, and that's an important thing, the fractal nature. Then we have the three composite ones. Exhorter combines teacher and mercy. So mercy, emotional experiences, teacher, general theories. So for the exhorter person, think used car dealer, think Churchill, Winston Churchill. I have nothing to offer you but blood, sweat, and tears. Okay, that sort of keep going, that motivation. It's related to dopamine. Anything that all the traits of dopamine seem to line up very well with what we found out with the exhorter. They don't just want theories, that's teacher. They want theories that apply to life. Theory, teacher plus mercy. They don't just want experiences, that's mercy. They want to learn theories from life, that's teacher. Hates boredom, hates to be frustrated. Those are the things that drive the exhorter. And again, lines up really nicely with dopamine. Contributor, perceiver plus server. So it's think of it as a rider on a horse. The horse is you see the arrow here goes from exhorter to contributor. The horse is the motivation, the drive, and the contributor chooses the rider on a horse. How? Using a limited a toolkit of facts, the perceiver, and skills. So that's how the plan forms. And yeah, we'll look at that a bit more. But that's the next stage. So plans, logic. Yes, this person emphasizes plans, logics. There's our goals. Optimizing appears to be related to serotonin. The evidence is not as extensive as with dopamine, but it seems to be there's a connection there. Finally, the facilitator sees everything from a distance, adjusts, polite, likes to experiment where one thing shifts at a time so as not to get confused. Surface awareness of all modules, wants freedom within stability. Facilitator thought, if there's too much freedom, hey, we need rules. If it's too rigid, hey, we need freedom. And that appears to be related to noradrenaline. And okay, now, quick pause. Any questions so far?
I have a dozen of them, but the most important one to start off with, when you say mind, are you really using the notion of the Greek concept of soul, or are you talking about the day-to-day thinking as being an immediate dynamic aspect of the operations of the body?
It's more soul, but I'm not so much making a distinction between them, but rather taking one step of abstraction away from the physical.
Okay, then that's fine. The second question would be, I'm a bit confused about the nature of your statements. I do not know which of your statements are assertions or which ones are propositions, and how the linguistic aspects of description of a living system or the biology of what's going on, and the examples you use from biology or the chemical examples, either one, relate to the corresponding propositions that one would use in logic or in mathematics.
Aha. Okay. And this is one thing that we will look at later with different types of thought. I am not using logic. What I'm doing is I'm starting with a model that I'm defining, and then I'm seeing how much can I explain with that model. In other words, I'm not doing Kuhn's normal science, where I'm solving puzzles.
I could care less about Kuhn's normal science. Couldn't care less about it.
Okay.
The issue is how do I as a listener, and this is my attention, all right?
Okay.
How do I translate your assertions or sentences as either as assertions or propositions, or if you would, axioms or axiological thoughts about how things are going to unfold? In other words, what I'm struggling to relate to, Lorin, is the relationship between the nouns that you use, the 6, 7 nouns,
Mm-hmm.
7 nouns. There is all 6 nouns and one attribute to one another in this context. The combinations come and go in my mind. So maybe I should just leave it at that and let you continue.
Okay.
Yeah, Jerry, I guess a little bit of tolerance here, tolerance of the fuzziness or grayness, and will get us the whole picture. But I do have 2 questions, Lorin, maybe you can address as well. Number 1 is, when you say 7 modules, is it purely conceptual framing of the module, or are you talking about some kind of physics or the physiology connection of the areas of the brain? That's the first question. Second question is
that one. Okay.
The categories here you highlighted out. Do they have a relationship with the previous MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator?
There is a
Rooted from Ron's work, 16 categories, and a lot of people shrink it into 4. So I wonder if there's a map or pros and cons that you can address.
There is. Okay. Very, very briefly, the 4 axes of Jung. You have Oh, come on. There's sensing versus no. Perceiving, I haven't thought about this for a while. Judging versus
Sensing.
thinking versus, yeah, okay. Now my mind's got blank. TF, thinking versus feeling. Okay, that one is thinking is perceiver without mercy, feeling is mercy without perceiver.
Mm.
Sensing versus thinking, TS, yes. Sensing is server without teacher. Intuition, sorry, sensing intuition. Intuition is teacher without server. And then you have the introverted, extroverted. Those are secondary. Also the come on, what's the other one? The
Judging versus
yeah. Judging versus perceiving. Those are secondary ones. So the two primary ones. See, the thing with Jung, with MBTI, is it's basically divisions, and it's walls. You can't build a model out of walls. You have to have modules. And so if you have to have modules that interact, then you can build a model. But yes, there is definitely a mapping onto Myers-Briggs with this.
But I consider your stuff is update with some advantages, right?
I find I can go further than Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
Okay, very briefly, I see that hand. Okay, Jerry, okay, I got a bunch of stuff to go through, but these are important questions that, burning questions. Okay, Jerry, just a very brief thing is, you often, when I talk about this stuff, I get stuck on exactly these philosophical questions at the beginning. And then if one goes further, one can go into the detail and, oh, okay, now it's starting to make sense. So that's what, hopefully that'll work. Okay, Gerard, I see a hand.
Maybe you will be coming back to it anyway. I'm wondering about this notion of freedom. The connections in the other areas, plans, for example, boredom. Is it a central concept in your way of thinking? Is it, well, I'm just asking for clarification of what you type of thing you mean by freedom.
Freedom, do you mean as in free will or?
Yes, I mean, that's why one possible interpretation. So it may mean that you're simply having variety within constraints, or it may be that there is a purpose.
Oh, that freedom. Yes. Okay. What happens is that what I found with that, and what we found in history with that cognitive style, is if the rules, perceiver, for example, are too strict, then there's no freedom for experiences.
Okay.
If the procedures, the sequences in server, how you do things are too strict, then there's no freedom to think in teacher. So they want that balance.
Okay, so more restricted than I was thinking, but as you say, it may come and be part of the whole.
But in terms of free will, what happens there is, and this, we'll look at the neurology in a moment, the exhorter part module comes up with several options and emotionally pushes them. Dopamine, the wanting. Then contributor thought chooses between these options. And so free will appears to be legit, but also restricted, like an election. You don't choose between anything, but you choose between a list. Okay, so now cognitive style versus cognitive module. Okay, hopefully this addresses Jason's question. So how this was developed. First, it started with a system of 7 cognitive styles. That was made more rigorous by analyzing 200 biographies. I didn't do that. My older brother did. This about 2 feet high pile of printouts. That gave 7 lists of personality traits for each of the 7 styles. And then I started helping my brother analyze those traits, and we looked at fundamental characteristics. So that's where the concept of modules came from, because it seemed like each of these traits were not just a random list, but rather could be boiled down into a different function, a different cognitive module. And then I found out that, hey, each of these modules maps onto a different major region of the brain. Okay, now problem. Everybody's got a whole brain, but your cognitive style appears to map onto a certain part of the brain. Huh? Well, how does that fit together? So the only solution I could come up with, and that's what I've been using now for about 30 years, is, hey, we've got all 7 modules because we all have complete brains, but we have control and awareness in one of them, and that appears to define cognitive style. What is that? I don't know. All I know is it appears that I really look at the world differently than other cognitive styles. My control and awareness appears to be different. So that's how I am functionally defining consciousness and, if you like, soul. I'm just saying, hey, it appears to be different. I don't know what it is, but it seems to work. Now, what you can do with that is you can treat each cognitive style as a window into a different module of the functioning mind. So, okay, if you get then a composite picture of how the whole mind could work, if you say, how does the perceiver person use perceiver thought? How does the contributor person use contributor thought? Oh, how does that interact? Let's put that all together. You get a composite picture. Interesting. That addresses David Hume's question of how you go from is to ought. Because you're going from a description of each cognitive style to maybe I should use that module and not just use my own, right? Okay. Okay, now we're going to look at details. This was an overview so far. We're going to look at details. Starting with
Can you just
yeah.
Give us an idea of what your conception of module is in that way? Because in cognitive science, there are about 10 different ways that people think about modules. I mean, what I'm hearing is that you're talking about different functionalities of the mind, let's say, and the way that I would interpret it is you have different circuits that are subserving those different functionalities, and depending on the balance of which ones you rely on for action, then that sort of determines your personality. I mean, that would be a way of thinking about it. But how are you meaning module, I guess?
Okay.
They're not necessarily discrete areas of the brain, are they? Or are they circuits that are overlapping, or?
It's actually where neurology is converging to now in terms of, let's say, executive function or your come on. Okay, what are the other ones? Your the resting one. What's the one? Oh,
The default network?
Thank you. That's the one. When you're not thinking about anything else. That one. Those are different modules that are approximately the same scale as what I'm looking at. And that seems to be where neurology is reaching a consensus that there are these different systems that tend to work together.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
one or another can take over at any one given moment, and you can be in one mode or another and driven by emotions or thoughts or motivations or memories or whatever. And
I've just found what I found is that seems to be a really nice way of cutting the pie. That seems to have good explaining power.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're doing on time. Okay.
Time is okay.
Okay. So looking at the teacher module, these were the first 2 that were localized in neurology, Broca's and Wernicke's area. So we'll just start with that. Wernicke's area, there's the little blue circle back there, looking at more current neurology. If you look in the temporal lobe, deals with phonemes, words, phrases. There are different levels there in the temporal lobe. It's a bottom-up automatic processing that's happening in the temporal lobe. You go further in the temporal pole at the front here, you got naming faces, landmarks. It's all verbal stuff, but it's happening automatically. And that's the aspect of the module, the teacher module, that is happening. It's data driven. It's not consciously driven. It's not, yeah. Then at the front, Broca's area is a lot of new research is being done on this. Teacher thought comes up with theories. Well, this area is really key. The left inferior parietal lobule, left ventral lateral prefrontal. Oh, they got so many names. It's used in cognitive reappraisal. It's like a paradigm shift. When you have an unpleasant situation and then you look at it from a new perspective, this area is critical. This Broca's area, actually. You're coming up with a new theory. And it's also top-down retrieval. You have some idea and then that within a context. So some central idea within a context. What is a theory? Thought about that a lot. It seems that how is it generated? You come up with, it's like taking a commoner out of the crowd and saying, you're going to be the king. And then you see if that king survives. For example, Einstein said, okay, speed of light in a vacuum, that's a constant. Can that rule over all of the universe? Turns out it does.
Yeah.
Sorry, was there? Okay. So you can interpret a theory as a focus, and that this Broca's area, there's good evidence that that's what it's doing. And it also teacher and server connected the theories and actions. There's an overlap here between verbal theories and action theories, and then it's functioning as a unit. Now, if you look at the front, research has been done discovering that, hey, there's an area in the medial orbital frontal cortex, that circled area, that handles beauty, that lights up with all types of beauty, beauty being an example of order within complexity. And then the emotional processor is the amygdala. There are ones in each temporal lobe. The left one, the differences between the amygdalae, it's consistent with the idea of teacher emotion. There's no direct evidence because teacher emotion isn't discussed. Okay, you see the different parts of the teacher module. There's an automatic part in the back. There's a theory generating part in the front. There's an immediate processor, and there's an internal emotional area. Flip hemispheres. Now we go to the right hemisphere, corresponding areas. This one's looking at nonverbal communication, which is how that area was first looked at in terms of prosody, the nonverbal aspect of speech. So comprehension, effective prosody, what they call it. At the back, there's your automatic part of recognizing nonverbal language. Then, you're remembering nonverbal information. You go to the temporal pole. Again, a lot of autobiographical memory here, personal memories, social cues. That's the automatic part, but it's not word, it's not theory, it's experiential. Move forward to the analog of Broca's area on the right. Instead of verbal structure, verbal theory, there's musical structure, and research has been done on that. Interesting, social coupling. These areas resonate when you put two people under brain scanners and they are interacting socially, these two parts will resonate, that you will get a resonance in this location. So it's experiential identification, the empathy. For a while they thought, hey, this is just something that stops. Stop sign, stop, don't do it. But they're realizing, no, it's more than that. Detect relevant stimuli. So a theory, here's my central thing. I interpret all the experience, everything in light of this theory. That's in the left hemisphere. In the right hemisphere, here's my goal, here's my fixation. I interpret everything in the light of my goal. For example, mercy person, I'm heading to the basement. Oops, there's a stairs in the way. I bump my toe on the stairs because I'm focusing, the mercy person focusing so much on the goal that they forget about the fact that there's a process to get from here to there. So yeah, there's this that you can see the symmetry. One's experiential, the other's theoretical. Then medial orbital frontal. Most of the research on emotion is being done in this area at an experiential emotion. So a lot of research done on that. And the processor. There's the emotional processor, amygdala, and deals with both positive and negative emotions. Okay, that's the teacher and mercy modules. Now let's go to the perceiver, factual, server, action modules. Again, automatic part in the back that just generates and processes information. So you have the right parietal, visuospatial manipulation, working with facts and connections and maps, that sort of stuff. Move to the front, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. What is a fact that is something more conscious, something that is more a fact that I assert? Well, it's beliefs, honesty, applying rules, suppressing urges. No, these are the facts. Don't give in to your emotion. Avoiding risks. These are the facts. Don't give in to your urges. Controlling non-default social behavior. I'm not just going to follow what everybody does. These are my rules. Switching languages from one set of facts to another fact. And this makes the cognitive appraisal of reappraisal that's being done in the teacher more effective. Okay, and so for all of these, I can find neurological papers, recent ones. Then the system of executive functioning. So you've got, that's the thing that is regulating the more emotional one and saying, here's the plan, here are the rules, here's how I'm going to guide everything. I'm going to maintain a focus. There's the module. Frontopolar, it's at the very front, much bigger in humans, also known as rostrolateral prefrontal cortex. When you have many contexts and you're trying to bring them together, or you're doing metacognition, then that part lights up. So it's high level analogies. And then the hippocampus, there's the processor. It's deals with space, how things are connected. And a lot of research has been done on that. Okay, server. Now let's flip to the left hemisphere. Parietal, instead of maps, you got action sequences, apraxia, action planning, working with tools. Moving to the front, less evidence has been as for that, but it's acquiring skills. You're choosing what action to do. You're not just automatically doing actions. You're actually having to think about your actions, like maintaining a mood or anti-procrastination. Stimulate this area, then it helps people to overcome procrastination. Experiments been done on that. There's the other half of your executive function. You go to the very front, you get analogies. So one thing functions like another. That is it's the associate, well, yeah, the server at the most general level. Hippocampus deals with both spatial connections and time connections. And okay, now that's the four simple
memory
mapping. Okay, quick break for questions.
and memory consolidation.
Yeah.
The hippocampus.
Yeah.
It's rebroadcasting those signals that are salient, that have been rewarded or one way or the other.
Yes.
Yeah. So memory is a whole nother functionality that I don't know whether that's in your system or not, but that's another basic functionality of brains and minds.
Well, I agree. And
Yeah.
the point is that there are different kinds of memories. And so it seems like you can divide the memories into these 4 different quadrants, these 4 different general things. And yes, the hippocampus is definitely required for, that's why I refer to it as a processor. It's the, it's not where the long-term storage is, but it's definitely needed for processing the information right now. And
Well, what is the nature of the processing that you're thinking of in the hippocampus, other than a representation of, sequences of events and their attributes and their hedonic valences and all that?
Is related to this idea of memory being reconstructive. So the long-term information is in the rest of the cortex from various areas, and then the hippocampus is reconstructing it and or holding on to specific information. I just read a paper that the working memory and the long-term memory, it's actually the same cells. They did for epilepsy, measuring specific human brain cells, neurons. And so that the longer you maintain it in working memory, so you're thinking about it at this right now, the longer you do that, the more it will become potentiated in the long-term memory, the better you will remember it. So the best I know is the best analog I know is like a CPU in a computer.
Yeah, I don't. It's more, it's more like a short-term erasable buffer and a long-term non-labile buffer. They're not. It's not really like a CPU per se in that way. The CPU actually does operations on, information patterns and registers, right? I'm not so sure that the hippocampus is operating on neural signals in a way that's analogous to that. It's more like it's recirculating or refreshing temporary buffers.
It's actually doing more than that. It is, and I can give you papers on this. It is looking for repeatability. Okay, repeatable features. So and then transitions from one context to another, either time-oriented or space-oriented. That sort of processing, I can give you papers on that one.
Fine.
Yeah.
There are time cells and place cells, and people are trying to work out how, well, really the nature of Lashley's engram, how are events and sequences of events held in memory, and what is the nature of a memory trace? Those are basic questions that still have not been answered.
I hear you.
Okay, go on. Sorry.
Okay, that's exactly why I'm trying to write my model. I call it a theory of the mind, because I'm working at the high level, and then I continually, every few years, I pop down to neurology again, make sure I'm in sync with what's happening.
Yeah.
So yes, so I don't get stuck on the rabbit.
It's really neuroscience, not neurology per se. If you think of neurology as a medical.
Yes. Okay. I hear you. Okay. Now let's look at interaction between modules, because that's where it gets really interesting. So the first thing is you've got perceiver deals with facts, puts labels of confidence on them. Mercy deals with emotions and experiences. Now, the arrow means there's an interaction there. So facts have, confidence is how certain I am about certain connections, but it also determines how much emotion I can handle without falling apart. For example, I may know what the facts are at home when studying. I get to the exam, suddenly my mind goes blank. Okay, there's an example. I may know that smoking causes cancer, but be unable to assert that fact when I want a cigarette. Okay, so there's an interaction there between confidence, factual confidence, and emotions, and that doesn't tend to be recognized a lot, and it seems to be really fundamental in mental functioning. How do you build confidence? Either it's like weightlifting. either successfully hold on to connections despite emotions, or find repetition. The more you find connections repeated, builds confidence. Now, what happens is, if the emotions are too strong, then the emotion of the moment will overwhelm the ability to determine connections, and you get blind faith there. Blind faith as in religious blind faith or political blind faith, and those can go together. How do you restore blind faith? Well, you increase the emotion. When the emotions fade, oh, I need to increase the fervor for the emotional source of truth. So it's a different way of knowing. It's knowing based on, I got mesmerized. The emotions overwhelmed me into knowing what's true. Oh, wait, what happened here? Okay, there we go. Okay. How do you avoid, science avoids this problem by being objective. So if we can just push aside the emotions, then we don't have to worry about holding on to facts in the middle of emotions. Guess what? That's no longer an option in science now, because postmodern thinking has invaded science and says we must have alternate knowing. And then, so now science is having to deal with precisely this question, holding on to facts in the middle of emotional pressure. There's a huge topic there that you can explore a whole bunch. Left hemisphere, it's not quite as obvious because teacher emotion, the emotion of beauty, it's more a constructed one. But you still get a stabilizing there. You hear words, they're unstable. You do the lab, you do the homework, the server actions, it gives stability. Actions give stability to experiences, leading to the idea of exemplars. So when you practice like an instrument, you are gaining confidence because you are repeating the sequence. And again, you can make a distinction there between, okay, following orders, the words overwhelm the sequence, versus skills. No, I know how to do things. Don't tell me what to do. So there's a, where is this happening? In hippocampus deals with the facts and sequences, but there's recent research being done between the posterior hippocampus and the anterior. The anterior, the front, is connected and interacts heavily with the amygdala, which is emotions. So that's where your
And novelty.
Sorry?
And novelty.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
As much as emotions and fear, it's novelty also. It's a novelty detector. You know, it's
well,
like
that's
an
dopamine.
early warning system for the whole brain.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, and it can work that way. The point I'm trying to make is that this interaction between the knowledge and the emotions is happening especially in the anterior hippocampus. Whereas in the posterior, it's much more detailed information that is not, how do I say, emotionally contaminated. And so there is this sort of interaction definitely is happening at a real time level between these two, whatever you want to call them, processors or whatever. Okay. Now, abstract versus concrete thought. If you look at, now where are we here? Okay, concrete thought. I want the coffee. So I do the action of bringing the coffee to my mouth. Mercy, desirable coffee, nice experience, server, action. Do the action of getting there. Now, if you look, you can't really see here, but there's no direct connection between mercy and server. This is just a, this is just indicates that they're both concrete. Instead, it goes from mercy, perceiver, contributor, server. So what happens is you've got your experiences, mercy, perceiver says, oh, it fits into this map. And then the contributor part that chooses says, here are the actions I will do to move between locations in that map. And that has happening at a fractal level as well, because at the frontal lobes, it's your personal identity is also being placed within a map of self-image. This is who I am, and what can I do to change where I am in my map. So what can happen is, let's say I'm watching a movie. I pretend that I'm already at the goal. I am the character I'm watching on the movie. So you get identification. It's a shortcut that the mind can take to jump directly to the goal rather than taking the steps to reach the goal. So there again, you can either follow a map or you can take a shortcut and emotionally pretend you've arrived at the goal. Okay, where is this goal stuff happening? Goals, orbital, frontal, emotional. Then in terms of the cost benefit, that's happening in the anterior cingulate. So it's just a bit above the orbital frontal. And then the action that's being turned into action sequences going through the basal ganglia and then coming up back through the supplementary motor area. So a lot of research has been done on goals to cost benefit. This, and we'll look at that a bit later. So that's where that's happening. Now, for the abstract, this one's harder to figure out, and there's very little, much less research being done on this. But if you go teacher, server, contributor, perceiver, what happens is you have a string of speech, just random noise, verbal noise, and then server thought thinks in terms of sequences. It's chunking it into pieces. There's your hippocampus doing that chunking. And then you're attaching that to meaning. So meaning, what is a meaning? It's a fact. Okay, this chunk of verbal noise is connected with this meaning. Putting those, and that appears to be what's happening in abstract thought. What you can do there, you can also take a shortcut. You can normally, you put meaning on stuff, use words, assemble them to create an understanding. But you can take a shortcut and say, hey, everything fits together, all is one. There's order within complexity. Facts, what facts? We don't need any facts. And that sort of thing is happening with mania, as in manic depression. Those who are overactive in this area, the teacher theory area, they're susceptible to mania, where you're coming up with facts and theories and you don't care about the facts. Put it together, overgeneralization, identification, that's what you see in mysticism. All is one, I am one with everything. So there provides a cognitive explanation for what's happening emotionally and mentally with mysticism. Okay, we'll do this slide, then another brief thing for questions. What we've looked at so far is normal thought. It's working with patterns and analogies. It's working at an analog level. It's gradually building pieces. It's not using logic. It's looking for patterns and gradually putting the patterns together. It's the sort of stuff that we normally use in normal life to go shopping, to, through the day. What are you going to do today? Well, most of the time we kind of know. Well, some people have it all planned out. I'm not one of those. Then what we'll look at next is the type of thinking, mental networks. That's the emotional type of thinking. Think of it as a triggered schema. So, for example, if you go into the bank, a bank, then immediately what that comes to mind is a schema of how one behaves in a bank. It was interesting, during COVID, you were supposed to put on a mask. And so I went into the bank. Normally you go into the bank, you're not supposed to have a mask. That's bad. Well, suddenly with COVID, it was good. And I was supposed to have a mask. It felt strange. Yeah, so there's an example of the pattern, the triggered schema being altered. Now, if there are two types of emotions, then there are also two types of mental networks. And we'll look at that. Technical thought. Okay, that's the one that's academia likes to use. emphasizes, that's the type that most of you are probably approaching most things, especially this topic, from, and you're being frustrated because I'm not using this type of processing. Clear rules, it's like a game. Clear rules, limited playing field. You know exactly what the rules are. You know exactly what the goal is. Everything's defined. We follow logical sequences. And that's technical thought. Two types of technical thought. There's the concrete one, deals with cause and effect, and the abstract one deals with precisely defined terms. So whenever somebody asks questions of, hey, our terms are not precise, we need to define our terms more precisely, I suggest that's a sign, hey, trying to use abstract technical thought, because that's what it requires to function properly. You need to define the terms. Okay, quick questions. Any questions? Comments? Okay, pick the top comment. Yes, Gerard.
What do you mean by a rule? Is it a command, an instruction? Are these different? So clear rules for precise goals in a limited game field. Whenever you do something in techniques, the main thing is that your thoughts are very fluent. So you try to do something and then it doesn't work, and then you change your goal and then it goes perfectly, etc. So the question is simply, what is a rule for you?
Okay, what you're talking about is optimization when you're adjusting the rules.
Yes.
But when, for example, okay, like in formal logic, you have certain rules. In mathematics, you have formal rules. And everything is clearly defined. That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Procedure.
Okay.
You're supposed to do things certain ways. Here's the code book. We do by the code. A bureaucracy. Here are the rules. These are the rules we follow.
Or natural science, here's how you set up the system to make an observation such that you're going to see this or that aspect of the system.
Yeah.
It's usually what I call constraint, but I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the idea you're trying to make it more rigorous.
Yes.
Okay.
I just have a question. Why? I guess I find it a little bit muddling to personify these sort of functionalities, or what I perceive as functionalities. I mean, it almost gets into sort of a quasi-mythological schema of these different actors. But you could talk, I think it would be clearer if you dispensed with the personalities in your typology and talk about either processes or functionalities or operations, different kinds of information and different kinds of operations, rather than this sort of interaction of perceivers and teachers and mercy, whatever that is, actors, I guess. Why do you approach it from that way?
Okay. First of all, the presentation I'm giving now is focusing mainly on the functions. Second, the research began with this weird stuff of mercy person, perceiver person, server person, and analyzing that, neurology has been catching up for the last 30 years. So actually using that vague way, we ended up coming up with all sorts of stuff that later on in neurology, I can now demonstrate from neurology, which I could not previously. So this vague way was actually the way that I developed a lot of this stuff.
Okay.
It works.
I think Lorin is just giving a name, giving a title of those functions. I mean, chunks of functions, if you agree.
Fine. I mean, you can think of it primarily as functions, and that's how that's how I'm
procedures.
Fair enough. Okay. But the thing is that weird method of analyzing biographies and personalities, that's where this all came from. And it actually came up with stuff that is now being confirmed by other more rigorous forms of thinking.
Well, I think that the relation between these functions and the neuroscience is actually a lot looser than you might imagine. But that's another question. It's easy to project. It's easy to project all sorts of things onto the findings of a neuroscientific paper, and people do. And but it's usually not really a very tight relationship, and often it's a projection. Let's just put
I
it that way.
agree. If I were doing this on half a dozen neurological papers, what you would be saying would be exactly right. I've gone through probably I've in the thousands of papers now. Just for this talk, I went through over 100 papers just as a okay, let's catch up on the neurology.
Mhm.
So and that's see what I'm using is normal thought. And normal thought, whenever a pattern is repeated, the more it's like image stacking. The more a pattern appears, the more as you get one picture fuzzy, 20 pictures stacked on each other, it gets pretty clear. And that's the sort of thinking that I've been using to develop this. Okay. And so eventually you reach a sufficient clarity that I can talk to people who are using technical thought and say, okay, my definitions are now clear enough that we can actually interact.
Well, my advice would be if you're talking to people who are in that technical thought mode, don't lead with a bunch of personas that you think embody these different processes. I'd say lay it out as a set of different kinds of processes that are going on in the brain, maybe different modes of operation, rather than this constellation of personas. You see what I'm saying?
I'm trying different ways of trying to maneuver past the past all the roadblocks to get into discussing the content. So
okay, that's just my
I hear you. I feel your pain.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Okay. This is now we're looking at the emotional side. Okay, not the normal thought. We're looking at the emotional side. Okay, I'm going to define something called a mental network. It's a group of emotional memories that function as a unit. So it can form after a crisis or after time. What happens is, okay, I'll give an example from the rat, done by mentioned by Anne Graybiel. She's looking at how habits form in the rat. So teaching a rat how to go through mazes, then it goes through your medial dorsal, then your what is it, dorsal medial dorsal lateral striatum. But eventually it went into the rat infralimbic, the IL cortex. The thing is, it turned into a habit with a trigger, an emotional trigger. And it didn't happen right away. It happened after a while. So that's how a lot of things, of these cultural things, initially occur or emerge. People do something, and then suddenly it turns into an emotionally triggered schema. So you trigger one memory, activates the whole mental network. Once the mental network is activated, it uses emotional pressure to impose its content. Now, if you get more than one mental network triggered at a time, then each is going to use emotional pressure to impose its content. You get an internal power struggle leading to a hierarchy of mental networks. And this is different than normal emotion. You got memories within a mental network have emotions, but the mental network as a whole generates emotion based upon consistency. Like with culture, if you do something like other people, that feels good. If you are different than other people, that feels bad. So it's an extra emotion based on consistency that imposes itself as in addition to emotions of positive and negative. If a mental network is triggered and continues to experience inconsistency, it will generate very strong emotion and eventually fall apart, as in breaking a habit. Okay, that's the mechanism. Now, here's an example. So, okay, he looks at the computer and he sees a picture of pizza. So he says to Jill, Jack says to Jill, why don't we make a pizza? See, because what happened is he saw the picture, it triggered the mental network of eating pizza and enjoying and everything to do with making pizza and eating pizza. He mentions it to her. What triggers in her mind is, well, the last time we burned it. Okay, so we have an emotional experience and there's a mental network being triggered. And so then she is also thinking what's triggering in her mind is the mental network of what is he like? How do I deal with him? And so, well, the last time, well, that triggers a mental network in his mind of what happened the last time. And then, he says, okay, well, why don't we order pizza? Notice you don't even have to have complete sentences here. You just have to say enough to trigger the mental network that brings a whole collection of emotional experiences to mind, and then that will trigger the response. So there's a simple example of social interaction happening with mental networks. Okay, get the idea. Okay. If you look at the brain region, now we'll go to the neurology, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the function of it corresponds in detail to a mental network. Okay, now there's an interesting question here. You've got scientific thought, which tries to be objective, studying the part of the brain that generates subjectivity or subjective bias. Interesting. For example, patients with lesions here, they passed the lab tests no problem, but in a real life social situation, they were horrible. So then they had to come up with new tests that were more valid in real life situations. Okay, first thing that's connected with this region of the brain, addiction. So how does that relate to a mental network? You see the thing, oh, coffee, I'm addicted, I want it. So you triggered the mental network. It triggers, it imposes a set of desires of, I want the substance I'm addicted to. Two ways you can deal with that. You can avoid triggering, or you can change the mental networks, which is what is done in cognitive behavior therapy. An emotional schema, culture. Okay, you go to a certain, like in the bank, how do you behave in a bank? Well, all sorts of ways. When you go into a church, how do you behave in a church, etc. Moving to, there's mental networks. It appears the mind also uses that to represent people. So there's your resting, why can't I think of the name? The one when you're just free thinking and you're not doing anything. You're thinking a lot about yourself. So you can have imaginary people like Santa Claus. We all know how, say Santa Claus, it triggers a mental network of Santa Claus's likes and dislikes. He doesn't exist, but the mental network still does. Theory of mind is related to that, and marketing manipulates that, triggers mental networks. Morality, another area of research being done on that. You have mental networks imposing themselves. Okay, you can think of morality that way. You can think in terms of power, but there are different ways that mental networks can interact. Altruism, trust. Okay, and theory of mind. When you see somebody, triggers a mental network. How do you think? Okay, that's the idea of a mental network, and there's real solid evidence relating that to the function of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. I'm over time now, so I'm trying to. Two types of mental networks, and this is an idea that you can go a long ways with. If you continue to use a theory, it will turn into a teacher mental network. What happens is it's the difference between, hey, I like this theory, and this theory is imposing itself on my mind and driving me to interpret situations in the light of this theory. That's what's happening. And it doesn't matter how you got your theory, whether it's legitimate theory or not. If you continue to work with it, it seems it turns into a mental network. And then it actually, there's your paradigm. It becomes a mental prison. It's the Maslow's hammer. If only you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And then you can look at that in terms of ideologies, the interaction where you're taking cultural mental networks, expanding them. Learned helplessness, when you're making theories of, let's say, I am unlovable. You've got a universal theory that contradicts, makes me feel bad. One's fighting the other. And cognitive reappraisal, when you're rethinking things from a new perspective. Okay. One could talk a lot more about this, and you can also think of that the mind appears to represent and interpret people as collections of experiential mental networks. What happens if you take a theory and you interpret it as a person? You get a concept of God, whether God exists or not. You can explore that. Okay. That's it for mental networks. Any questions, comments? I'm skipping through a whole bunch of stuff here.
In cognitive science, we would think about it in terms of associated memories and spreading activation amongst conceptual nodes and even memory traces that contain all of the attributes related to a sequence of experiences, including the goals and the procedures that you went through in terms of acting and the hedonic outcomes of that, the consequences of that. And so that would be the language in which that would be a way of translating your mental networks into concepts that are more normally or widely used in cognitive science, I guess.
It does translate, and it does translate. I hear everything what you're saying, but what you're describing is the more individualized pieces that are happening, which tends to be studied in the lab. I'm looking at the additional idea that these pieces can come together and function as emotional schema.
I'm just trying to give a translation.
I understand, and I've read those terms. Okay, yeah. What I'm trying to say is there is a lot. There's good research on this specific area, saying, hey, there's something more happening, and that's the whole thing of the people who initially researched this area. They did it at that detailed level, and if that part is damaged, the people seem to be okay, but then they put them in the real world and they were horrible. They were just socially totally inappropriate. So then that's what I'm saying. It's that extra dimension of going with the package, which takes the pieces that you're talking and puts them together.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you say more about what you just said? Because I have been thinking all your modules or networks constructions inside by those neurons that is dynamic instead of fixing at a specific area of the brain. So because I saw a good number of cases that the brain got a physical damage, some cases very serious, that big chunk of the whole brain is gone. But gradually, according to those reports, gradually after exercises, after have reinstallation, whatever, the rest of the brain can go back as if it's the total brain function-wise. So I don't know how if these modules or the functions or procedures that you outlined are kind of a residence of the certain area. Well, it is always like that for all human beings, or they are kind of a dynamic, self-organizing emergencies that can even the same pattern can still re-emerge after physical damage.
Okay, what happens is an alternate strategy kicks in.
Alternate
An
strategy.
alternate strategy. So it's another module that is not optimal for a certain task, takes over using its own strategy to do it. For example, with speech. So if you lose your speech circuits, then what can happen is you can use musical therapy, which is doing with a nonverbal module, the Mercy module, and you can reconstitute speech to a large extent, but it's an alternate way of doing it. It's not usually as efficient, and I think if you lose that alternate method, then there's no recovery. So yes, what you're describing does happen, but it's not that the original function comes back. Usually what happens is alternate strategies kick in to carry out the function.
Peter, you also agree, right?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, so he's referring to music, melodic intonation therapy, which, you know, Gabby
That's one
Giffords
example.
was who was shot by that crazy person in Arizona. And so she lost the ability to articulate, to speak in terms of phrases. And in those cases, you can use music and rhythmic scaffolds to get the person to actually be able to sing like a phrase, like "I want a glass of water," and so it doesn't. It's not returning the function that was originally in the area that was damaged, but it's sort of an alternative pathway for achieving something like that function.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why
Can
Mason
I-
Conference needs two experts in the
Can
same.
I ask a question still? Sorry.
Please go ahead.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Well, yeah, is that the one? Yes.
No. Yes, it is. Sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
no, it is. The point, you know, I'm looking and trying to follow precisely what you're saying. I'm looking at the examples, and I'm a little bit in confusion because the examples are not all of the same kind.
Okay, which one?
Some of them, you might say, I'm unlovable, but then the Kuhnian paradigm shift is a different type of example. Or you might look at Kuhn and say, we have our truths, that is a different kind of example. So I wonder what in your mind
Okay,
is
I skipped the
this
details.
nice example.
I skipped the details in terms of in order to save time. Oops. Okay.
Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
these are different examples. Yes, you are precisely correct. Okay, I'll look at them very briefly. Ideology, you're taking your personal experiences, your cultural mental networks, and you're using theory, the teacher module, to exaggerate them and universalize them. Okay, so limited mercy mental networks, teacher thought is universalizing in an overgeneralizing manner. Okay, learned helplessness. You're taking specific, in this case, specific unpleasant experiences, like that person wasn't nice to me, and you're turning it into a universal theory of I am unlovable. People are always nasty to me. And so then what you do is your theory fights your personal emotions. So you're only happy theoretically when you're miserable personally. Okay. Cognitive reappraisal is I hate spiders. Ooh, that triggers mercy mental networks that make me feel bad. Well, let's look at that from a different perspective. Let's talk about that. Let's gain an understanding of that. So you're reappraising, you're using theory to reappraise your experiences. Kuhn is here are the facts of science. Let's put them together in a new way. Take the same bundle of sticks and pick it up from a different perspective. Okay, so that what you're doing is you're it's the same facts, but you're rearranging them to get a new theory. And concept of God, you're saying, if the mercy mental networks represent people, well, I wonder what a teacher mental network, what a universal theory interpreted as an intelligent agent, maybe that's a person. Well, let's call it God.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, those are different examples. Okay, thank you. I skipped at my. Okay, now I'm going to try the last section here. We're going to look at technical thought, which is how does it function? So we have contributor is server plus perceiver. Okay, server does sequences, perceiver does facts. Connections, how things connect, sequence, how things one after another. So what happens if you tie these together? Well, there, okay. What happens if you have the connections here? This is connected to that, but they're connected by a sequence. That gives you a sense of cause and effect. You can think of cause and effect as a sequence that happens with endpoints, or you can think of it as a connection, a solid connection between this point and some later point. So that appears to be the basis for concrete technical thought. Now, how does concrete technical thought use that? It uses these cause and effects as steps in a plan. Okay, I get from here to there, from there to there, from there to there, from there to there. Now I'm at the goal. Now I rearrange these steps to make it more efficient or whatever. For example, the driver of a car. You get in the car. What do you use the car for? You use it to get from point A to point B to point C. Okay, that's an example of cause and effect and concrete thought. Now, you can take the same pieces of cause and effect and you can build a structure of them. Instead of saying, where does this lead to this, to this, to this, to this, you can put it together, you can arrange it, and you say, hey, look, I've got a building. Isn't that cool? That gives you teacher emotions of order within complexity. That's how the mechanic views the same car. The mechanic isn't looking at the car as a tool of getting from here to there to there to there. The mechanic is thinking of the car as a bundle of pieces of cause and effect functions that connect together in a specific way. So, and that you can see that more generally with a machine. And you can see the technical thought. Each part of a machine is precisely defined with a precise function and very precisely defined, and it fits together in precise ways. So this is an illustration of how technical thought functions, the building blocks of technical thought. You can see it with machines. Each machine has a limited domain. It's very clearly defined. You can replace the parts. Okay, how does this relate? Well, higher math and logic. What parts of the brain do they use? It activates bilateral, dorsolateral, prefrontal, and parietal. It's this executive function mainly. It's the perceiver and the server. And it's a different sort of activation than what you get with language. So consistently, if you look at the higher math and logic, you find that this perceiver plus server is being activated in the cortex. Okay. Is that okay? That's the general idea. Now, what happens with language? Language is an add-on to this. What happens is you have meaning, perceiver, plus sequences, chunks of language, server. When you put them together, you have, well, how do you put them together? Okay, you can get the same action, the guy walking, can be connected with, that's a meaning. And then, laufen, walking, marcher, rouler, different verbal strings. So you have to choose which one to connect them. Now, what makes it technical, you have to get regular expressions. Like in math, you can't say, you can only put symbols together in a certain sequence, an official sequence. You have the proper way of doing things and precise meanings. And that's how it goes beyond the normal thought, abstract thought, to the abstract technical thought, is you get the precision. What exactly does this mean? How are you supposed to say it? This is, if you want to communicate properly with other neurologists, this is the way, these are the regular expressions that you should use when you talk. And these are the precise meanings that people attach to these regular expressions. Okay. So that's the sort of thinking that is used when you're trying to enable or develop abstract technical thought. Here's the problem. You get specializations, each with its own technical vocabulary, each has its own limited domain, and each has its own threshold of, hey, you have to meet this level of rigor in order to be able to function and participate within this technical community, statistics, peer review, that sort of stuff. And then how do you translate between one language and another? Okay. So that's a lot of what I've been hearing from the other meetings is this sort of discussion. How do we define it more technically?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's look at how, here's the goal stuff. How the technical interacts with the emotions. A lot of research done on this, but only at the concrete level. From the mercy experiences to the drive to the plan. From words, the verbal stuff, well, you can't do it with animals. They don't speak. And not much, it's much harder to find research on that. So, and in terms of laterality, right, left stuff, most of it's just both sides. But with those provisos, there's interesting research being done here. Okay. Technical thought tends to be objective. Now, what does that mean neurologically? And this is current research, and I'm finding it's quite interesting. So you have your value, that's your emotions, mercy, in this case, orbital frontal, anterior cingulate turns it into the cost benefit, the cause and effect stuff, okay? What is the cost of doing this action? What are the benefits of doing this action? And then it goes into, now, not just everywhere in the basal ganglia. Are you familiar with, there's matrix and striasomes. So the striasomes are like it's like the plums in the plum pudding. And recent research, really interesting stuff on this. This sort of normal value that doesn't think in terms of mental networks, just thinks it's the economic stuff, goes into the matrix of the basal ganglia. Then what happens is you have your dopamine is encouraging you which one to do. There's dopamine 1, dopamine 2, and dopamine 1 focuses on the main alternative. Dopamine 2 focuses on the alternatives. That's your election. Okay, here are the various candidates. We recommend this one. You could choose these. So that's what's happening there. Now, there's another circuit that can kick in that involves the striasomes. It's coming, and it's called pessimism circuit, what Graybill refers to it as, a high-stakes circuit, where a stress circuit, where there's fear, stress, anxiety kicks in, more emotional. It's not your normal cingulate, it's the pregenual cingulate, has to do more with self and identity. Example for this, okay, as a Canadian, okay, free trade between US and Canada. What sort of tariffs are we gonna put on? Okay, that's normal thought. Then you get the high stakes thought, which is Canada is going to be the 51st state. No. Okay, that's kicking in a different circuit. It's kicking in a much more, okay, we're not just selling, we're selling our grandmother, okay? So, but they're neurologically, it's the plums, the striosome plums deal with the deeper emotions within the more objective and specific matrix of cause and effect. Okay, so applying this more widely, technical thought tends to be objective and specialized. So you got neuroeconomics, and one paper on neuroeconomics says, well, all the papers on neuroeconomics, most of them will talk about the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So you're triggering not just a single desire, but you're triggering a whole nest of a whole collection of desires that are motivating people to buy stuff. Guess what? Economics ignores it. Economics says, no, pretends it doesn't exist. But at the same time, all the marketers using, how many of you anybody heard of Bernays? Sigmund Freud's nephew. He, in the 1920s, he developed the rules of how to manipulate people. And his description lines up really nicely with mental networks. So that's at the same time that economics is neuroeconomics, this ventromedial prefrontal, people, that's just irrational stuff. That has nothing to do. At the same time, marketing is manipulating that in order to sell the economics. Yeah. So obsessive compulsive.
So
Yes.
what you have in the frontal cortex are competing goals basically, and they're getting there's some sort of neural representation of those, and they're competing for control over behavior.
Yeah.
And
okay.
and yeah.
Yes. Okay. What I'm saying is there's a second level to this. That yes, what people like Rolls are T. Rolls is working on is the individual memories in the orbital frontal cortex with their emotions going through the anterior cingulate with the cause and effect and and then going into the basal ganglia. Yes, that's happening, but there's an additional thing of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is imposing these mental networks of groups of emotional networks. And neuroeconomics is studying it, economics is ignoring it, marketing is manipulating it. Okay, interesting connection now, looking at this from a different perspective, your technical thought. Technical thought tends to think in terms of, here's my rigorous thinking, well, here's the economics thinking. Okay, this is the way sane people think, the economist says, and this is the way other people think who are not as rational as the rational thinking of economics. So
we're going to have time for discussion after you finish.
I think I've got one more slide.
Okay.
Okay. So you got your serotonin. There are two types of serotonin, 1 and 2. And what happens is the serotonin 1 appears to be connected with your normal following a plan. Serotonin 2, it's an LSD thing. LSD kicks that one in. And you can generate mystical experiences artificially with the LSD. So you're letting go of the technical, what happens, well, what is that other? It's the emotional stuff. And you can tell that it's guided by mental networks because whether you have a good trip or a bad trip depends very much on the context. Okay, and then what is it doing? It's that number 2. It goes to the striosomes. It's that higher level emotional stuff. Okay, skip. And last slide. Facilitator thought. Okay, it connects with what the thalamus is doing. So it's not just a reptilian brain. There's facilitators, surface awareness of all of them. Thalamus integrates, mixes and balances as an observer. That's your locus coeruleus, noradrenaline. Facilitator can listen politely with a closed mind, selective attention, and paradoxical Paradoxical kinesia, there's an interesting one. I'll skip that one. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Fire away.
Thanks.
Asking him to say hi, and he's just bark. Anyway, please go ahead. Comments?
I'll comment. I have three specific questions in mind.
Okay.
First of all, before that, I appreciate the enormous amount of work and effort you have put into searching the literature in the neurosciences and elsewhere, and bringing out your personal views and in how to categorize these into different classes of basically emotional views about the role of individual nouns in the language, which I find to be quite an interesting sort of categorization. It's really, I can understand why you spent 30 years doing this, and yeah, the results speak for themselves. So with that as an introduction, second point, the initial classification or categorization into these 7 categories of nouns, of doing, of just being as a noun. What was the motivation for this, and how did you come to these I shouldn't say strange, these unique semantic concepts in terms of modules? What were the criteria that led to the reduction of all of language down to these 7 nouns?
Okay. I cheated. It actually comes from a list of 7 spiritual gifts in Romans chapter 12, which in the 1970s was first being interpreted as a system of cognitive styles.
Okay. Second question. I
should add on that. By the way, the religious people who still use these categories won't talk to me because I'm being too secular for them. Okay.
Well, that's your problem, not mine.
Is there,
let me finish.
is there a book or reference or paper that outlines that? Can you give us a reference for that theory or way of thinking?
Okay. I've got the one that maps it onto neurology. It's about an 85-page paper.
Okay. Do you want to put that in the chat?
Just look up Lorin Friesen in Google Scholar, and it'll come up.
The paper
It's called Mapping a
Cognitive Theory onto Neurology.
That's the one.
Okay.
There are other ones, but that's the main neurological one.
And there's a reference to that in that. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Okay, Jerry, sorry.
Second question. There is, within the natural sciences, there are systems of symbols that are used to categorize different observations.
Okay.
And one at one extreme, one has purely the vernacular language, and that any scientific observations could be translated into some sort of vernacular language that the common, ordinary, everyday man could understand in some sense or another.
Okay.
And perhaps in your case, you've tailored these technical languages to fit into the mindset of a psychologist or a psychiatrist, want to express them to his patients or something like that. Is that, but there's other symbol systems besides the ordinary alphabet. And particularly, you've used the chemical symbol system for certain purposes. You've used the mathematical symbol system for certain purposes, although rarely. You've ignored the logical symbol system completely. And within this context, I'm trying to understand what is your notion of a symbol? What is your notion of semiotics? What is your notion of semantics?
Okay, what my bottom line, first of all, what you're asking is precisely how do I put this into regular expressions and precise meanings? Okay.
No, and not my question. My question is, how do you relate these symbol systems?
What I'm saying, okay, my basic bottom line is I cannot use technical, I'm trying to see how the whole mind works, in all of its different ways of functioning. And that if I try to just reduce that or state that in terms of technical language, then I find that I will lose an understanding of how part of the mind works. So I'm trying to define it as precisely as I can while still holding on to the various ways in which the mind appears to be functioning.
Well, you still haven't come to my question, Lord, and that is these different semiotic notions of how to interpret symbols are basic and common to the sciences as well as music, as well as the certain level arts. How do you relate these in your own mind?
I'm looking in terms of similar cognitive cognitive modules and how they interact. That's how I'm relating one field to another. That's my translation. And so I may not be, I don't know all the highest level of logical reasoning. What happens is I am working with this at a, how do I say, a spiral. Each time I go around, I find, hey, I can understand the formal language that's being used more. But I'm not, yes, I'm sure that there are holes where I'm not totally formal. And I find that totally formal thinking, I can use it with computers, no problem. And I'm eating my way into getting more formal, but I'm not starting from formal. I don't know how, the translation is cognitive modules. That's the translation.
I think there's a way of answering that question in Lorin's typology. I mean, you talked about sequences and regular expressions, and there must be mechanisms for handling those. And so you cover syntactics with that. There are mechanisms for, you talk about meaning, and those processes would be involved in semantics, the semantics of symbols. And you talk about goals and how those are realized and interact with other types of processes, and that constitutes the pragmatics of the symbols. So I mean, I think it's fairly, you'd have to translate it into your own system,
which I'm doing all the time.
But those three dimensions of signs and symbols, you know, it's possible to make an interpretation in your system of what those would be, I think.
And that's the sort of thing, exactly what you're talking about. That's the sort of thing I do when I'm looking at various systems.
Yeah.
So Peter, let me see if I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that the notion of a sequence of symbols, like for example, a sequence of musical notes expressed in the musical notation, which is temporal in its character, is an adequate way to also, in this context, to express the logic of chemistry, for example.
Yes, syntactically.
Syntactically. Fantastic.
And some, you know, in Morris's scheme, you know, syntactics, semantics, and pragmatics, syntactics has to do with the forms, devoid of the meaning. Semantics involves the manifold consequences of a message for the system and subsequent behavior. And pragmatics involves the relations of the symbols to goals. And so, you know, you can link those things to different kinds of mechanisms and processes that are going on in the brain, whether they relate to, you know, the motivations of the subject, or whether they influence the, you know, emotional and cognitive ramifications of receiving a message. You know, you just won $1 million, right? That has a lot of meaning. Or just the syntactics, you know, A plus B equals C. And you can repeat what those symbols were that I just uttered.
Peter, yeah, I agree with you, 100% there. And I agree that stuff it's now 100 years old. And from my perspective, it's out of date by at least 75 years. But
okay. Well,
but anyway,
maybe it needs updating. But I think those concepts are very powerful.
Yeah, no, that is a scheme of rationalization which associates some symbols with some languages. But I think Lorin is going far beyond this in that he is pushing this notion of symbol or symbolization totally into the background and using purely giving predominance to the language use of all terms and then fitting all the symbol systems into the vernacular without recognizing the different scientific languages are radically different from one another and have a different logic associated with them. And so that all of his, for example, all of his usage of chemical symbols in terms of neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, etc., to attribute causality at that level to a human emotional response or some other human response is just conflating two different symbol systems. And so the cause-effect type of relationships that he's expressing seem to me to be lacking in precision, lacking in integrity. But that's just my position of, and I recognize he has every right in the world to do that. And he can do it and express it. And he does at times a fantastic job of doing it.
See, what I'm doing is I'm using normal thought in a semi-rigorous manner. For example, with dopamine, I'm looking at what neurology says, or whatever you want to call it, says as the traits of, okay, dopamine is associated with this. I'm comparing it with what I got about exhorter thought from the personality, and I'm noticing an extensive overlap. And so I'm saying, they seem to be connected. Okay.
One final question, and then I'll stop. The issue of there's a group of people that have been identified now, I think about 10 years ago or so, that were classified as aphantasic. Aphantasia, the inability to construct images in their mind. Are you familiar with this phenomena?
I don't know if I read specifically on it, but this idea of some people have internal voices, some people have internal images, some don't.
No. This is a genetic deficiency in a small fraction of the human population. 1% roughly is fairly severe, and then it grades off to about 4% or so.
Aphantasia?
Aphantasia, the inability to fantasize.
Okay.
So they cannot, and I have two friends that are both endure this particular phenomena, but they can't do really mathematics because they can't draw a picture in their mind of functions,
right,
relationships. Yet they can do mathematics on pencil and paper where they can see all the signs and process it. But it goes far beyond this in terms of capabilities. So how would one put this sort of mental capability into your view of categories?
My first thought, okay, first two things I'd look at is, one, is it related to cognitive style? Because, for example, the mercy person who lives in experiential finds it very difficult often to do the abstract math. Okay, there's one example. So that would be my first question. The second question is, okay, are there any neurological deficits? And then that would help me to figure out where to map it.
But the whole thing is a neurological deficit.
Yeah, but I know, but what parts of the brain? It's not just the brain's not working. So, I don't want somebody to say my computer's not working. Well, what about the computer isn't working? Okay, then
No, these people lead absolutely normal lives. The brain is functioning normally in the sense of normalcy. One of these friends is a very competent poet and graduated from the university summa cum laude.
Okay, in terms of math, there is something called, and research is being done on what's called math anxiety. And what happens is remember I said the facts, the perceiver facts, and the mercy emotions, they fight each other. They can fight each other. And so that's what's happening in math anxiety. The emotions from the amygdala are overwhelming the ability to think rationally in terms of math. It's yeah, okay, one can go more into detail, but that would be another way I would be looking at it is in how are they programming their mind? What sort of is it mainly an emotional knowing, or is it mainly a factual knowing?
Thank you very, very much for a very interesting presentation.
So I don't know if that addresses your answer or your question.
We haven't heard anything from Ram yet. Ram, are you there? Hello.
Yeah, I'm there.
On the spot.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Actually, the questions that Peter and Jerry have been asking are exactly the same thing that I wanted to ask. So, in my presentation, I start from exactly the opposite direction. That is, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, right? So, whatever I want to say at the high level, I need to somehow be able to relate it all the way back to the first eukaryotic cell if possible. So that kind of relationship we need to establish. And then the second thing is, now we are all really split personalities, trying to say, I'm a perseverer, I'm a mercy all the time. I'm not convinced that is realistic, right? So depending on what happened on the day, depending on the context, and depending on the value that I associated with a certain experience, I'll be reacting differently. So I am all 8 different types, or if I'm using the Meyer-Briggs, I will show all the 16 different attributes, but predominantly I'll be in one mode most of the time, right? So, but that's the second point. And then the third point I want to say is we can't just focus on mind, and we need to be looking at the body, which is what I've been presenting in all my presentation. That is, the way I break noradrenaline, acetylcholine is to start with with them producing body awareness, and then the dopamine and serotonin are giving me the mental portion, mental attention. So the emotion really is broken into the body awareness and the mental attention. So there are so many differences I have with. I kind of look at it very differently, and then the most important thing is in a systems approach. It's not sufficient to present a theory. You need to present the hardware implementation and the algorithms, right, to make it all self-consistent. So you can't start from today and try to explain everything. You really need to know how this whole thing came together. That's all I have to say.
Okay, your first 3 questions. First of all, when you say we have to interpret everything from evolution, what you're really saying is I have used the theory of evolution sufficiently for it to form a teacher mental network in my head, which is now emotionally imposing its explanation upon my statements. So, and actually, I would interpret that as you are actually being cognitively driven to say that you shouldn't be cognitively driven, which is, and that's the inherent contradiction that happens when science tries to do teacher emotion, because it tries to be objective and external and physical, but then it becomes internally emotionally driven to continue doing that. So yeah. The second thing is in terms of yes, you say that you see all these modules in your mind. yes, that is a characteristic of, sorry, the facilitator person. I mean, that's the, I've other people have told me, well, if you think you're all of them, then you're probably a facilitator person who has the conscious awareness of all these modes and balances between them. And hey, I'm using this mode, now I'm using that mode. Finally, in terms of body, yes, I have not looked at the interaction between the mind and the body in this. It plays a major role, especially in the initial programming of these cognitive modules. And I would look at Piaget's stages of cognitive development there. I didn't talk about that at all. Yes, there you do need to include the interaction between mind and body. Yes, it is significant. No, it was not discussed. Sorry, I didn't have time.
You can do another time. Anyway, I have been doing a little experiment by relevant to our Oxford project. I'm converting the stuff from your guys into a format that makes sense to teenagers. So I just did it the last time with Jerry's stuff. And Jerry was pretty amazed about that, I guess. The middle school interpretation of your presentation. So I'm going to do the same for Lorin, but I have one request. If you, when you give me your slides today, give me two versions. One is your original version. The other one, I need to do a little work to replace every acronyms into plain English. Can you do that?
Yeah, I did the acronyms because there wasn't enough space.
Yeah. You don't worry about the space because you just give me a PDF file that I can feed to my Robert. That would be fine. So unfold every acronym into plain English so that the Robert would understand what is that.
Okay, but I have a PowerPoint.
You can do that in PowerPoint. It messed up a little bit of your formatting, but it doesn't matter as long
but
as
you're okay. But the AI is okay with the PowerPoint.
The AI and I will convert your PowerPoint into PDF.
Okay.
The AI can read PDF very patiently. So,
Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering what format you need it in.
I want to suggest also just make a slide with the reference to your paper, Mapping a Cognitive Theory onto Neurology. It looks like it's available on ResearchGate. But make an explicit PowerPoint slide so it will be in the stack so that people can go to that and get the text version of your theory.
Okay, I've also got a paper on the mental networks, VMPFC. I can add a link to that. I did a paper
Put that in your slide as well.
Yeah, second language acquisition in neurology, did one on that. I don't know if you want, there's another one on economics.
We'll make a slide with a reference list.
Okay, I'll put.
It's then in the video record.
Okay.
Great. This is fantastic. Any more questions or comments? We're just right at time.
I just make one comment, and that is, of all the philosophies of science I have listened to, I find this to be one of the most unique.
Okay.
I'll take that as
criticism, or it is
cognitive reappraisal. I will take that as a compliment.
Okay. Good. Thank you so much.
It's a really daunting task to try to come up with a comprehensive theory of mental functions and their neural basis. So you get a lot of points for the difficulty of the problem. That's why I've been trying to throw as much stuff as I could, because I don't want to deceive myself.
And if you could add something to highlight more about how this is better than MBTI, because that was so popular and so
I know
influential.
it. Okay, yeah, I've got a whole.
If you could do something over there, you may really start a revolution of a paradigm shift.
Well, yeah, okay, and that's another entire topic, Myers-Briggs. The main translation I do between that is between which it's the one that thinks in terms of primary and secondary, that interprets the four letters. In that, I find that that's the sort of mapping that seems to work best with Myers-Briggs.
Okay, looking forward to your slides.
Okay.
Slides. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for coming, and see you next time.
Thank you.